They fired me without a word. No handshake, no explanation. Just a box in a hallway that suddenly felt colder than the servers I'd spent 2 decades protecting. I was the man they erased, but I was also the one who built the firewall, the actual system they still depended on. And what they didn't realize was this. I never stopped documenting. I never stopped watching. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about competence in silence, dignity under pressure. And what happens when the quiet guy they underestimated decides to expose the rot from the inside out? You're about to see how. I uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud, turned the tables on 3 powerful executives, and rebuilt something better without raising my voice once. Stay with me. They didn't even look me in the eye. After 20 years, the silence was louder than any insult. My name is Mark Halden. And until precisely 9:42 a.m. last Monday, I was the lead infrastructure architect at Corvus Systems, a mid-sized software firm with Fortune 500 ambitions and a memory as short as its mission statements were long. I was 57. I had started when the company was still running on refurbished Dell towers and Windows Server 2003. They called me the backbone once, not affectionately, but operationally. That was before. I'd spent most of my adult life inside that building, first as a contractor, then full-time. Watched the paint change shades on the walls over the years from warm beige to steel blue, as if professionalism came in color. Pallets. I never asked for more than I earned. I gave more than they knew. Or maybe they knew and didn't care. That distinction stopped mattering the moment they slid the envelope across the table. There was no conversation. No performance review. It's just a 1-page document, signed by someone in HR I'd only met twice. Severance. Small. No cause listed. Just structural changes. No handshake. No eye contact. Just a hollow, quiet erasure. Suppose they thought. I'd flinch. Instead, I nodded once and left the room. I could feel the heat of the fluorescent lighting on my neck as I walked back to my office. My desk still exactly how I left it the Friday before. 2 black and white photos pinned to the corkboard. One of my son at his first robotics competition, the other of my wife and I on our anniversary in Asheville. A ceramic turtle paperweight I'd found at a yard sale, now heavy with irony. I packed slowly, not out of sentiment but precision. Like I was cataloging something no one else had the patience to understand. From the hallway I heard whispered guesses and the faint tap of keyboards resuming rhythm after the shock had passed. 20 years is a long time to fade so quickly, but I suppose they thought I'd grown obsolete, like the servers I'd decommissioned, the backup tapes I'd labeled by hand. What they didn't realize or had chosen to forget was that I'd written the original firewall protocols myself, not installed them, designed them before our cybersecurity was outsourced to buzzwords and overpriced consultants. I built the digital perimeter brick by brick and brick by brick. I had quietly kept track of where everything still connected, of what was patched and what wasn't, of who had access and who only thought they did. I was the one they called when things went wrong. Quietly, after hours, no tickets filed, just a phone call. Mark, it's not routing the way it's supposed. 2, can you check, Mark? There's a weird outbound spike. Could be nothing, but it was the final fallback. The last line, until, apparently, no one escorted me out. That was their first mistake. Not out of malice, just apathy. They thought I'd go quietly, and in a way I did. No arguments, no emotional scenes. I walked through the glass. Doors into the sharp chill of late October with my box, my badge still hanging from my neck, and no job to return to. But something was already shifting inside me. It wasn't anger. That's a young man's burden. It was closer to disbelief, distilled into clarity. Like waking up in a house you'd lived in for years and suddenly seeing the cracks in the walls you'd painted over. That morning. Cry. I didn't drink. I didn't tell my wife everything. I just drove home. Opened the windows of my study and listened to the wind move through the dry leaves on our oak. They'd forgotten who built the firewall, and I'd remembered something. They hadn't. I never stopped watching. I never stopped documenting. That night I didn't sleep. not in the usual sense. I lay in bed beside Anna, listening to the rhythm of her breath, the slight creak of the floorboards shifting with the cold. My eyes stayed open, not wide, just quietly aware. My body rested, but my mind was sifting through 2 decades of architecture, decisions, mistakes, not mine. Theirs. The systems I designed weren't beautiful, but they were durable. Underneath the company's shiny new cloud interface, my code still pulsed quietly. Legacy systems, they called them now. As if age was the same thing as irrelevance. But I knew where everything still rooted. I knew where the real access logs lived. I knew what was visible to auditors, what lived one layer beneath the default admin dashboards, the audit shadows, I used to call them, and I knew because I'd made sure that no one had fully disabled my access. Not yet. The next morning, I pulled the blinds open just enough to let in the gray light. The sky over Columbus looked like wet steel. I sat at the same oak desk I'd had for 15 years, ran my hands along the grain, and booted up my personal laptop. Not a company device, never had been. The laptop was clean, isolated, and still connected to a few small tools I'd built. Tools I'd once jokingly referred to as keystones in meetings when the execs started tossing around. Digital transformation plans they barely understood. Ran a test ping, it returned. They hadn't severed me from the architecture. That told me something critical. The exit wasn't personal. It was careless. The new CIO, Nathaniel something, came from finance, not engineering. Hadn't even shaken my hand when he joined. I remember his first all-hands. He talked about streamlining redundancy and restructuring digital trust models like they were slogans off a Gartner slide. He once asked me in a meeting if DNS failover was really necessary in the cloud. I didn't correct him. There's no use arguing with someone who's already decided the system thinks for you. I checked the remote logs next. It's partial access. Enough to confirm something odd. Activity in our deprecated financial shell. That subsystem had been scheduled for sunset 3 quarters ago. Why would it still be active? It wasn't my business anymore. And yet I couldn't stop. Not out of revenge. Not yet. More like curiosity, wearing the skin of concern. A few folders, a few logs. And then I found it. A series of vendor payments routed through a legacy process. Not illegal on the surface, but strange, the names unfamiliar. Apex Point, Parallax Dev, Northgrove Consulting, but the code beneath the transactions. Mine, my script's old ones, barely modified, were still pushing packets, still scraping approvals. Still validating credentials based on trust keys I'd written in a rush during a Thanksgiving outage in 2012. No one had rewritten them, just painted over them with newer interfaces, and whoever was using them now, they didn't know I still had the skeleton key. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady but slower. No panic. No sense of purpose yet, just something cracked faintly, like the soft pop of drywall under pressure. They'd fired me without a word. But they'd left the door open, and someone inside was moving money through the floorboards. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a coffee, and stood at the window watching a man walk his golden retriever past our house. The dog stopped to sniff the grass. The man tugged the leash impatiently. The sky hadn't changed, still the color of quiet. In that moment, I understood something fundamental. They thought I was gone. They thought I was finished. They forgot who documented everything. I didn't need access to destroy them. I just needed to observe, and I was very, very good at watching quietly. I spent the next 2 days doing what I'd always done, best watching patterns, not from spite, from instinct. I was never the loudest voice in the room, never the one pushing new frameworks, just to seem current. My strength had always been in recognizing what others didn't think to question. Code that didn't align, timing that felt off, processes that technically checked out but practically didn't make sense. From the comfort of my quiet study, I followed the data trails. Not aggressively. I left no footprints. I didn't log in through main channels. I ran scripts through passive echo points buried deep in the deprecated layers of the system, The parts no one had bothered to decommission because they assumed no one still knew. They existed, they were wrong. I'd buried them. What I found was subtle. Like rust under paint, small but consistent transfers to vendors I'd never approved. Authorized under credentials still linked to former employees, most of those accounts should have been scrubbed from the system. Some had been marked inactive but never truly purged, and that's where the money moved quietly. Under the radar, with just enough legitimacy to pass surface-level audits. Old access keys, legacy trust chains, outdated automation pipelines, pushing funds through blind spots. I had documented and flagged years ago. I stared at the approval logs until my eyes blurred. The names meant nothing, but the patterns did. Somewhere inside Corvest, someone had figured out how to move money in a way no current system would detect, by riding on the bones of the old infrastructure. The infrastructure I had built, the very system they deemed too legacy to warrant my continued employment, was now the highway for something potentially criminal. The bitter part of me laughed. The pragmatic part. It just opened a new folder and began saving everything metadata. Time-stamp trails. Encryption token mismatches, all of it. I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. Not without proof. It's not without knowing what I was up against. But I knew this. Whoever was doing this didn't fully understand the system. They were abusing. They were walking through a structure they hadn't built. Not realizing the beams beneath them weren't just wood, they were wired with sensors. My sensors? Late Thursday afternoon, I received an email. It came to my personal address, one I hadn't used in connection with work in over a decade. Subject line was blank. The sender, JP Hill, IPS, at consultixpartners.com. There was only one sentence. We'd appreciate it if you could respect your departure agreement. I hadn't signed a departure agreement. That meant one of two things. Either they assumed I had, because they'd fired others before me the same way, quietly, silence and NDAs, or they were trying to scare me. Bluffing either way, they knew. Someone had noticed something, and that meant I had less time than I thought. I shut down the laptop, sat still in the dim light of my office, and let the silence press in around me. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. I could hear my pulse behind my ears. No fear, not exactly, just a new clarity. I wasn't just observing now. I was in their blind spot, and the question shifted from what are they hiding to how far would they go to keep it hidden. It was time to test their defenses, time to see what broke under a little light. Friday arrived with the first frost of the season. The windows shimmered with a thin glaze that fractured the morning light. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, mug in hand, watching Anna stir cream into her coffee. She didn't ask anything. She hadn't all week. It's not that she didn't care. It's that she knew me well enough to recognize when I wasn't ready to speak. She gave me space like oxygen. Somehow, that said more than words ever could. By 9 a.m., I was back at my desk. The chill from the hardwood floor had settled into my legs. I didn't mind. The discomfort kept me sharp. Focused, I began sending probes. Not loud ones. Not brute force. Just subtle, frictionless touches. I pinged the inactive directories again, this time from a cloaked subnet that mimicked a routine maintenance scan. I watched the network response times fluctuate as automated security systems tried to determine if the activity was legitimate. They didn't flag it. I knew they wouldn't. I had written the exception rules myself 8 years ago. Then I checked. The last employee change logs, there it was. 3 terminations that week. Mine, 2 others. Lower-level tech support staff. Both with years of tenure. All 3 positions marked redundant. But here's what caught my eye. In the hours after their terminations, all 3 of our credentials had been used, rerouted through a permission shell labeled temporary admin access. Financial audits that shell didn't exist in. Our protocol library. It was custom. Recent, it was created by someone named Loring. I froze. Alex Loring was the new director of digital risk, brought in 6 months earlier, supposedly to modernize the compliance framework. Mid-30s, polished, LinkedIn heavy. The kind of guy who said synergy without flinching. I'd only met him once in an elevator. He didn't remember my name, but apparently he'd remembered my access. I opened a private cache I hadn't touched in years, my watchtower, as I called it. It was a system I built during the 2014 server collapse. A passive flagging net designed to catch cascading permissions errors before they caused actual breaches. It had since been decommissioned by newer leadership in favor of flashier tools, but I'd kept a version, updated it in secret. Quietly, the watchtower caught something instantly, a loop in the vendor approval logic. A recursive function used to validate invoice identifiers that had no upper bound counter, which meant, once validated, an invoice could resubmit itself under a new tag, indefinitely, as long as it mimicked a legitimate source. In simple terms, laundering script.elegant, minimal, buried, and unmistakably criminal. That's when the weight of it settled. Fully on my chest, they weren't just cutting corners, they were rerouting money, siphoning it, using the bones of a system I had. Built-in trust for stability, not exploitation. And now, it had become the scaffolding for theft. Quiet, incremental theft. Just beneath the surface of daily operations, I leaned back in my chair, my hands cold, my jaw locked. I'd spent 2 decades preventing this exact thing, and now, in my absence, they were betting I'd walk away with my box of desk plants and let the structure rot behind me. I picked up my phone, not to call anyone, just to hold it. The weight of it reminded me I wasn't helpless. Then I set it down, walked to the window, and stared out at the neighborhood. The frost had melted into tiny rivulets crawling down the glass. My reflection looked tired. But underneath the tiredness, something else stirred. Resolve not to take revenge, to restore integrity. I turned back toward the desk and opened a clean drive. It was time to build a report. But not just any report, an airtight, site bulletproof narrative of their failure, rooted in timestamps, process logic, and financial evidence. No emotion, just data. Because if there's one thing I've learned in 20 years of systems architecture, it's this: emotions lie. Data never does. And I had the receipts. The next 48 hours passed in near silence. I worked like I used to in the early days, head down, disconnected from the world except for the soft click of keys and the low hum of thought. Anna brought food to my desk without speaking, left it beside my mug, and walked away. No pressure, no questions, just presence. I wasn't building a report, not really. I was constructing a forensic map, piece by piece, connecting the misuse of old system shells to new identities, layering financial trails on top of digital access logs, laying bare the spine of a scheme no one had expected to be audited because they'd fired the auditor. By Sunday evening, I had something real. No speculation, no theory. Just verifiable, time-stamped evidence. Unauthorized vendor shell accounts, inconsistent IP access patterns, inflated payments disguised as renewal fees, falsified internal memos approving vendor engagements signed by people no longer at the company, and behind it all, a pattern. Names began repeating. Alluring the digital risk. Directorj Phillips, the external consultant who'd quietly expanded system. Privileges for Loring just weeks before I was fired. And finally M. Dresden, CFO, of course. Money doesn't move unless someone signs off on it. And Dresden had always been friendly. He once told me I reminded him of his father. Said it like a compliment. It's never sat right. Now I knew why. I sat with the weight of it for a long time. These weren't simple corner-cutting infractions. This was organized, methodical financial misdirection, executed quietly, hidden in the folds of outdated infrastructure. And then, once the fraud was comfortably running, it began eliminating anyone who might notice. I checked the 2 others who'd been fired with me. Both had worked in adjacent systems to the vendor management pipeline. I was the last domino, except I hadn't fallen. They thought I'd vanish into irrelevance, but all they'd really done was free me. I had nothing to lose, no job to protect, No access to revoke. I was already out, and that made me dangerous. I didn't send the report to anyone, not yet. First, I drafted a message, not to the company, but to legal, to someone who had known me before the titles before. The Firewall. A former VP of Security and Compliance. Retired now, back when Corvest was still trying to prove itself. He was the only executive who ever sat down beside me during a breach recovery and said, "Walk me through." I want to understand. He did. He listened. And he remembered. I found his private email from a 10-year-old thread archived on my drive. Typed slowly, carefully. Subject: Legacy Systems, Eyes Only Jim. I know it's been a long time. I need 10 minutes of your trust. What I'm going to send you next isn't noise. It isn't bitterness. It's fact. They've compromised the company. And I think you're the only one left who might understand what you're looking at if you want. The full packet. Reply with still watching. If not, I'll erase this message and move on. I sat with my finger over the send button, then clicked. I watched the message disappear into the cloud. Like a breath in winter air, the wait began. That night I couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't restlessness. It was calm. The kind that comes after doing something irreversible. The kind that signals there's no going back, and that maybe it's exactly what you needed. At 4:03 a.m., my phone buzzed. Subject: Legacy Systems, Eyes Only Body. Still watching? I smiled faintly. The system had failed. But the people hadn't. Not all of them. And I wasn't alone anymore. By Monday morning, everything felt different. Not externally, the sky still carried that dull slate gray of late autumn. But internally, something had shifted. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting. I was positioning. At 9:12 a.m., James replied again. Got your files. Reviewing now. Quietly. We'll loop back. No signature. No fluff. Just the tone of a man who understood the weight of what he'd been handed. I went for a walk. No headphones. It's just the crisp air biting through my coat. Leaves skittering at my feet like restless thoughts. I passed the coffee shop where I'd spent every Thursday lunch hour for years. The same couple still sat near the window, she with her sketchbook, he with his paper. Time, it seemed, had moved for me and stood still for everyone else. By the time I returned, James had followed up. This is deep. I can't believe they let it rot like this. I still have a few contacts on the board, one in particular, Camille. Norwood, Audit and Ethics Committee. Clean, straight-laced. I'll make sure this lands in her lap. You did good. Mark, they don't know what's coming. I reread that last line. They don't know what's coming. Not a threat, not a promise. Just the inevitability of systems, revealing their weaknesses when stressed at the right joints. By noon, I was blind, copied on a forwarded message. Camille had seen the packet. She'd flagged it, escalated it, and quietly scheduled an unscheduled financial subcommittee review for Wednesday morning. Subject: Discrepancies in vendor audit pathways? Confidential? I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. This wasn't vindication. It was due process catching up to delay. At 1:37 p.m., my phone rang. Blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. A breath. Then, Mr. Halden, this is Alex Loring. I said nothing. I believe there's been confusion. I'd like the chance to clarify a few things. I'm not confused, I said. Calm, even. Then perhaps I can offer context. A pause. Calculated. The financial processes you've referenced are above your prior level of clearance. Engaging with them post-employment violates you. Built fraud into legacy frameworks you didn't understand, I said. And you left fingerprints everywhere. The only thing I violated was your assumption that I wouldn't notice. Silence. Then a shift in tone, less polished. What do you want? It was the question men like him never ask until they're cornered. Nothing, I said. Nothing you can offer. Another pause. Shorter now, fear tightly wrapped in control. We can still resolve this. Right. Discreetly. I hung up. Not out of rudeness. Out of finality. He didn't know yet that the board was already looking, that the packets had already been copied to offsite drives, that the report lived in 3 secure cloud vaults, scheduled to release automatically if any one of them was tampered with. They'd fired the architect, but forgot the building still belonged to him. Later that evening, James called. Camille's. In, she saw the invoices, the names. The routing shell you flagged. Loring's fingerprints are all over it. What about Phillips? External contractor. It's got deniability. But the contracts he pushed through, they bypassed legal review. That'll stick. And Dresden? Silence so far, but the payment trail's tied directly back to him. Board's putting pressure on. Wednesday's meeting won't be pretty. I felt no joy. Just a calm certainty. Everything that had once been buried under jargon. Promotions, titles, ignorance was finally surfacing. System vulnerabilities, properly exposed. Bring everything down, and I had no intention of stopping the collapse. Wednesday dawned brittle and cold. The kind of cold that doesn't sting, it just seeps in. Quiet, certain. It's like a fact you can't reason with. I sat by the window in my study, coffee cooling beside me, laptop closed. There was nothing more to do. Nothing more to send. At 8 a.m., the Audit and Ethics Subcommittee convened on the 14th floor of Corvest, its downtown office, the same floor where my access badge used to work. I pictured the long glass-stopped conference table, the hum of HVAC no one ever fixed, a chair at the far end that always faced the projector. That chair now held Camille Norwood. Across from her, Dresden Loring, and I assumed Jason Phillips. The room had changed, but the silence in it, the sharp, rehearsed defensiveness hadn't. I didn't need to be there to know how it played out. At 8:37 a.m., I received a single-line text from James. They're cornered. Board wants full investigation. Forensics. Team being brought in, that was the moment it became real. Not just suspicion, not just theory, but a systemic failure being pulled into daylight. Wire by wire. At 9:11 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Voicemail. I didn't pick up then. Another. And another. By 10:20, I had 7 missed calls for voicemails. And 2 emails, one from Human Resources, the other from a new name. Kara Mandel, interim CEO. I opened hers. Mr. Halden, we've become aware of your involvement in surfacing critical vulnerabilities in our financial systems. I'd like to extend my personal thanks and formally request a meeting with you in confidence. To discuss how we might move forward, I believe your institutional knowledge is invaluable at this juncture. Please let me know when you're available. We would like to ensure your voice is heard. Respectfully, Kara Mandel, Chief Executive Officer, interim. I sat back. They were scrambling. But this wasn't the same as Loring's veiled threats. Or HR's form letters. This was different. Shift in posture. They weren't trying to silence me anymore. They were trying to restore what had broken. I didn't reply, not yet. Instead, I opened the window, let the cold air creep into the room. Let it wake me fully. I thought about what I wanted. For weeks. The answer had been clear. Accountability. But now, with that in motion, a different clarity began to form. I didn't want my old job. The role was gone, even if they offered it. Back, even if they renamed it. Even if they paid double. The foundation had cracked. The hallway walls I used to walk past every morning with quiet pride now carried the ghosts of compromise. But I also knew this. There were still good people there. People who trusted systems I'd built. People like Steven, who once asked me why. We salted our hashes even if no one else did. People who would be left behind when the rot was carved out. They needed someone to protect the rebuild. Not for ego, not for status, for integrity. At 11:52 a.m., I replied to Kara Mandel. I'll meet you. One condition. You don't just fix the code. You fix the culture that broke it. No pleasantries. It's the truth. because that's the only way anything worth keeping survives. The meeting was held on a Thursday. Quietly. No announcements. No press releases. It's just a private conference room in a neutral space. An off-site building the company used for overflow client meetings. A place far from the boardroom where I'd been erased, and now, where I would be heard, Kara Mandel stood. As I entered, mid-40s, sharp eyes, a kind of composed weariness that told me she hadn't slept well in days. Good. That meant she was taking this seriously, Mr. Halden, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. I nodded. Once, you don't have to thank me, I said. You should ask why it was ever necessary. She didn't flinch. I have. Repeatedly. There was no small talk. No water bottles. Just 2 chairs, a plain table, and a laptop between us. She gestured to the device. The board's been briefed. They've reviewed everything. Logs, the vendor trails, your diagrams. It's airtight. You built a case no one could ignore. That's because I didn't build it for attention, I replied. I built it for the truth. She nodded. We've terminated the involved parties. Phillips is under federal investigation. Loring's credentials were revoked immediately. Dresden? She hesitated, resigned. Before we could complete the internal review. But the damage is done. And so is the silence. Silence. That word lingered in the air. It wasn't just what they had done. It was how many people had looked away while it happened. I'm not here for revenge, I said finally. I'm here because what you still have is worth protecting. I meant it. The engineers, the junior sysadmins, the quiet ones like me, who didn't climb the ladder, but held it steady for others. They deserved better. Kara leaned forward, her voice lower now. We want you to come back, but not to your old post. That position was beneath what you've done. I raised an eyebrow. We want to create a new role. Chief Systems Integrity. Officer, full executive access, reporting directly to the board. You'd have oversight of it, compliance, cybersecurity, audit alignment. Your word would be final on infrastructure decisions. It's no politics. I let the silence stretch. Unfiltered authority? I asked, transparent, independent, protected. And if I say no? Her voice didn't waver, then I'll understand. But I hope you won't. Because if we're going to rebuild this company the right way, we can't do it without someone who understands the difference between a firewall and a facade. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. It wasn't victory. It wasn't vindication. It was something quieter. Weight. Finally lifted. All right, I said, standing. But we do it on my terms. No silence. No shortcuts. No forgetting who actually builds the foundations. She stood too. Agreed. That afternoon, I walked through the same doors I had left weeks ago. Not as an employee, not as a ghost, but as a returning architect, carrying blueprints for something better. The building looked the same. But I didn't, and that mattered. 6 months later, I sat in a new office. No corner views. No ego furniture. Just a solid desk, my old ceramic turtle, and a quiet awareness of how easily systems break. When no one's watching the integrity underneath, the fraud was prosecuted. Funds recovered, policies rewritten. But more importantly, trust began to regrow, one decision at a time. Stephen now headed our infrastructure division. I gave him the authority no one had given me back then. He didn't waste it. I didn't speak much at executive meetings. I didn't need to. But when I did, people listened. Because they remembered now, and so did I. You don't build legacy in titles or trophies. You build it in silence, vigilance, and when necessary, exposure. On my last day before holiday break, I updated my LinkedIn profile for the first time in a decade. Just one line in the About section, they forgot who built the firewall. Remembered where the cracks were. Then I closed the laptop outside. The first snow was starting to fall. Quiet, precise, and clean.